So, students in grade 8 have to make choices about high school courses that will have a significant impact on the rest of their time in high school and even on their options after graduation. Applied courses were meant to provide increasing opportunity to students, but are they really accomplishing their goal? That's a question we face a lot of times. Speakers will share their experience in a discussion about who is choosing applied courses, why are they being chosen, and what advice parents and students are getting in grade 8 when these choices are made. I know for myself, you go into high school and you get all sorts of different advice about applied courses. Some people say it creates an incredibly dangerous precedent for the rest of your life. Some people say it's strategic. So we're going to get into seeing what really the situation is. I'm going to start off by introducing our speakers. We have Kelly Gallagher-Mackay. She is the research director at People for Education. Kelly is also a lawyer with a PhD from the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education, with a strong focus on equality issues in education. In an earlier life, she was co-founder and the first director at the Aktisirak Law School in Iqaluit, Nunavut, a fully certified LLB program for Inuit students. She also did legal work in New York City, Toronto, and Bolivia. Kelly has been learning much about public education as a parent of 2 children in elementary school and through work with child care programs. Starting October 2013, Kelly's work at People for Education is supported by the MyTax Elevate Postdoctoral Fellowship in cooperation with Direction, Evidence, Research, and Policy Group. We have Mr. Wayne Erdman. He is a retired mathematics curriculum leader with 33 years of teaching experience. He is also a senior mathematics author with McGraw-Hill Ryerson and a practicum supervisor with the Ontario Institute for Studies in Education. Most recently, Wayne was chair of the 2011 Ontario Math Olympics and co-chair of the 2013 Ontario Association for Mathematics Education Annual Conference. He regularly presents workshops on a variety of topics related to mathematics education. That's a lot of math. Next we have Norah Marsh. She is currently a superintendent of education for the Limestone District School Board. She has held positions for the past 6 years and is primarily responsible for student achievement at the secondary level in K-12 Aboriginal education. As a teacher, Norah has dedicated most of her teaching career to students who are most at risk of not completing high school. In particular, she created opportunities for young women to pursue post-secondary education through an integrated program, Women for the 21st Century. Norah was also a secondary school administrator in the Greater Kingston area for 10 years, serving in both rural and urban school settings. She holds an honors degree in history and English from the University of Ottawa, a Bachelor of Education, and a Master's of Education from Queen's University. She is the mother of 2 teenage daughters. And finally, we have Joanne Gosselin. She has spent her 31-year teaching career supporting students with pathway planning and transitions. Most recently, she was the coordinator of student success at the Ottawa Catholic School Board, where she worked very closely with guidance counselors, staff, students, and parents on pathway choices, specialized pathway programs, individual timetables, and transitions. In addition, Joanne has taught guidance courses at the University of Ottawa, and she has worked as a guidance consultant. Although she has recently retired, Joanne will be working on a re-engagement project designed to assist students who require support to attain their OSSD. She hopes to continue working with students and parents to support them with their pathway planning and transition. Please, let's have a round of applause for our panelists. Fantastic. Okay, so now we're going to go into speaker presentations. So, if you will, Kelly, to start us off. Fantastic.
So thank you all for coming, and as a member of the People for Education staff, I can't tell you how exciting it is for us to have so many people with us this weekend from all across the province. We're very proud of this research, and we're very proud of the conversations we hope we've started across the province. And I'd like, before I start talking, to acknowledge the other members of the People for Education team who are here, without whose work we would not have this report. In particular, Laurie Matheson, who's been a member of the tracking team at People for Education for about 17 years. Carrie Prue, our research fellow, and Bodong Chen has just joined us this year. So this research represents very much a collective effort, and it's my pleasure to present on behalf of all of us. Now let's see how I progress. So we released a report this spring called The Trouble of Course Choices in Ontario High Schools. And this is who People for Education is. I'm going to assume, since you're at the conference, you know that. The Trouble of Course Choices in Ontario High Schools was a special report that was developed out of our annual report on Ontario's publicly funded schools, which is a major part of People for Education's work every year, is to keep track of some of the resources and opportunities that are being offered in Ontario's schools. And we're interested in the question of applied course taking, streaming, sometimes it's called tracking, it's called, mostly in the United States, all those terms mean roughly the same thing. Academic streaming was abolished in Ontario in 1999, but the Toronto District School Board had my favorite euphemism. Is that a question of form or function? They asked. Students choose in grade 9 between different course types: applied, academic, and locally developed. And I'm not really going to talk too much about that. As you can see, the courses that they choose between those levels tend to be the ones that are the more traditionally academic courses. And what we see is that although students are perfectly free to mix and match their courses at different levels, in fact, there's quite a high concentrate. When students are taking one applied course, they tend to be taking a whole cluster of applied courses. So it still remains true that we can talk a bit about a program of study. And there was something we really didn't know the answer to going into this research, is how many students in applied math are just taking math, because we've heard quite a lot that it's just a math thing. And it turns out only about 10% of the students, so most of our data will focus on math, I'm going to tell you, but only about 10% of the students in applied courses are taking applied math, according to the Ministry of Education last year, and 62% of those in applied math are taking 3 or more of their academic courses in the applied group. So we were aware of the broad international literature, and I'm not going to walk you through it, but it talks about streaming and tracking or ability grouping, and it suggests that there's barriers to excellence and equity associated with early ability grouping. And they've identified in the international literature 3 main issues. First, differences in achievement between students in applied or academic type courses. Second, that there's no way out. An early decision actually does limit long-term potential. And third, that there are major demographic patterns in who takes applied and academic courses in Ontario. So we wanted to see, there's the international literature, there was some great research done in the 1980s in Ontario. We wanted to see what we can find out about what's happening in Ontario today on those 3 issues. And these are our data sources. I'm not going to go into them into too much detail, but the survey of schools that conducted by People for Education is a survey of principals in all the elementary and secondary schools across the province. We use demographic data which had been analyzed by the Educational Quality and Accountability Office, EQAO. They don't just do tests, they also do a lot of very important research on the school system. So we used their data, which they had taken the census data and broken it down into school level demographics. And we used information from the Ministry of Information, who were very patient in responding to, Ministry of Education, who were very patient in responding to our many data requests. So the first thing we knew going into this research is that there are significant achievement gaps between students in applied and academic courses. And you've got all the details there. I'm not going to talk about them in too much detail. But I would want to say that in the grade 9 math assessment, one of the reasons that's a particular red flag is that the assessment is tailored for the applied course or for the academic course. It's not the same assessment for every student. So that 40% gap there is very significant. The ministry looks at credit accumulation as sort of a more holistic measure of how students are doing while there's still time to reach out to them in grade 9 and 10. And what we see is there's a huge gap in the credit accumulation patterns of students in applied courses as opposed to those in academic courses, really marked. And quite shockingly, we think, the ministry does not collect disaggregated data by course type for graduation. So we can't report on current graduation numbers. But we know that from 5-year-old data by Dr. Alan King of Queen's University, that students in applied courses are far less likely to graduate from high school, far less likely to pursue college, and that 50% of students in apprenticeships took academic maths. So even there, which I think a lot of the time when people think applied courses, they actually think tech. So it's not tech we're talking about, it's something different, and we see a real difference in patterns. The question, one of the core questions is, do applied courses reflect differences in where students are coming from going into the courses? Is it just a mirror of what comes in, comes out? Do they reproduce, or do they exacerbate gaps? And we were particularly struck by this research by the EQAO. They did a very extensive cohort study with methodological resources we do not possess. And they looked at how students did based on their grade 3 and 6 performance, and then how they did depending on what kind of course they took in grade 9 math. And what you see, and you almost always say this wrong when you're trying to present it, but what you see is that students who were not meeting the EQAO standard, didn't hit level 3 in EQAO in grade 3 or 6, those of them who went into, so those are students who are clearly flagged as probably having some challenges. Those who went into applied courses, 30% of them were successful on the grade 9, met the standard on the grade 9 math exam. Those who went into academic, which a lot of students might have perceived as harder, 47% of them were successful. The same pattern happens for those who met the standard in grade 6 but not in grade 3, so students who are improving. Those in applied, 61% of them met the standard, 77% of them met it in academic. And those who met the standard in both, again, very significant gaps. So students taking the harder courses are less successful. The EQAO research is really good at pointing out there's a lot going on for these students. It's not just the course. Students aren't doing as much work, are less likely to do homework, are less likely to say they're good at math, are less likely to like math. There are really significant contextual differences between these students. Those are attitudinal as well as demographic differences. Those are work as well as demographic differences. But there's very striking differences, and we have to understand school, I think, as a social place where some of what's going on is also to do with the courses, the peer group, the instruction. And this slide, above all, and again, credit to EQAO for doing it, points to reason for serious concern, that it might actually be making these gaps worse. The second question, is this a course choice that allows students flexibility? Our research suggests that there's no way out. The principal survey, 91% of principals said that students never or not very often move from applied to academic courses. So they've made this decision in grade 8 before they've hit high school. Once they're there, they're there. 34% of schools require a transfer course to move from applied to academic. There's sort of a complicated curriculum thing. On the books, you're required a transfer course. Principals have the right to exempt you. Of those schools requiring a transfer course, 81% of them aren't offering those courses during school hours. And this quote from a principal talks about, and we had a lot of feedback like that from the principals, expressed a lot of doubts about whether the transfer courses were effective. So principals may not be making an irrational decision by not offering transfer courses, although they might be making an important signal to students. But there really doesn't seem to be a lot of ways out of applied once you're in there. Finally, we were interested in looking at the demographics. So what the international literature and Canada is quite far behind in terms of collecting demographic data on students compared to most jurisdictions. So we have relatively limited proxies for demographic information. What we used was the family income and family educational background at the school average level to do this work. What the international literature suggests is that students from high poverty, low parental education, racialized, working class backgrounds are far more likely to be found grouped into these courses that may or may not have the effect of exacerbating disadvantage. And we wanted to know, how's that for Ontario? Well, this, and I am not a math teacher, I'm one of the people who had to learn that I could find math useful and relevant to me in my everyday life. If only I'd had practical applications in my academic math course. So what you see is that the enrollment, that the level of enrollment in schools in applied courses is very strongly correlated with the family income. Across the province, about 32% of students are in applied courses. If you are in a school with a relatively low average family income of $60,000, it's a better than even chance that students, more than half of students will be taking an applied course. If you're in schools at the top end of the spectrum with an average family income of $120,000, it's a better than even chance that under 10% of students will be taking applied courses. So there's a really big difference between schools. Plain and simple. And here we looked at a bunch of other demographic factors that were available to us through the EQAO data. Particularly significant, and Carrie has been very emphatic in making sure that we talk about parental education, both whether parents have a high school diploma. We've now flipped it, okay? Before we were talking about the schools with the highest and lowest income, now we're talking about schools with the highest and lowest percentage of applied enrollment. So schools where 58% of students are applied in enrolled in applied mathematics, sorry. Schools where 58% of students are enrolled in applied, that's the 10% with the highest applied enrollment. Family income is about half, poverty is higher. Students with parents without a high school diploma hovers just under 15% compared to the 10% of schools with the lowest applied enrollment where parents without a high school diploma are merely 6% on average. Immigration is a very funny race proxy, so we don't use it. We had very different results for the GTA, and if anyone wants to go into them in more detail, maybe we could save that for questions. English language learners, where there's a lot of English language learners, despite high parental education, there tends to be a lot more applied enrollment. Aboriginal students, we just did a report on Aboriginal education in Ontario's public schools last week. 69% of Aboriginal students in secondary are in applied math, according to the province, and that's individual data, not school-by-school data. So, because we're trying to sort of whip through it, I think we can say we had two main recommendations. First of all, we think that this demographic data for our very own province means that we really have to go back to the drawing board a little bit. We have to get some province-wide research that looks at demographics, that looks at achievement issues, and that looks at what's happening in grade 8 for these students. And so we're starting to ask some questions about this. This is a continuing research program at People for Education. And based on that review, we are recommending that the province consider redesigning grade 9 and 10 course choices to ensure no students are disadvantaged. And there's some pie graphs that make the same point I've made all the way through. Thank you very much.
Okay, I was asked to specifically address or discuss the issue of grade 9 or the applied stream in mathematics. If you look at what happened, especially in the past 5 years at the QAO grade 6 results, they have not been very good. In fact, they've been going down. I'm looking more at the high school level. But first of all, we need to look at what the pathways are. Kelly talked about the pathways, but pathways are different for each subject area. Just a bit of knowledge here at the academic level. When you go on to grade 11 and 12, it's called the university prep. The applied at the grade 11 and 12 is called the college prep. The locally developed is also known as essentials. Locally developed simply means it's developed by the local board. And then it's called workplace prep in the last 2 years. And many programs have an open stream in grade 9, 10, and then in 11 and 12 it's called UC or university/college. Math, science, and English are heavily streamed. And that's primarily because they're highly academic. But others have more open courses, such as the arts. But there's also either pathways where you can move between them, or what Kelly mentioned was some transfer courses. So it is always possible to switch between the pathways. If we specifically look at math, we're going to look at, just to very quickly look at a few of the charts. Flow charts generally you read top to bottom. This is left to right. But you can see that there are an awful lot of streams going on in math. Top down is the academic university stream, the applied college stream, and then the locally developed essentials workplace stream. But every time an arrow moves upwards means you can transfer from one stream to another. So there are a lot of opportunities. The problem is they're not very successful because they're moving from what should be a very concrete system, let's say in applied, to a very abstract system in the academic and university stream. So students generally struggle when they try to move up. But if we also look at English, it's a similar chart, but it is easier to transfer from the applied to the academic. If I recall, there are no transfer courses that they need to take. I can't speak for English teachers, but I do know the reason, in particular, if we back up a little bit to the math, that transfer course from grade 9 to 10 applied to academic is there simply because the content in the 9 applied is significantly less dense in comparison to the academic, so they do need that upgrading course.
Less what? I'm sorry, I didn't.
Sorry, less dense.
Dense.
Yeah. So a lot of the content. We're going to see some examples, but a lot of the content in the academic you don't see in the applied. If we look now at science, again, grade 9 science is. There is an academic and applied, but again, those students can move up or down without a transfer course. But then, as you move across to the right, there needs to be, quite often you need to back up a grade. So take, if you want to go from 11 college to a grade 12 university stream, we'll have to take a grade 11 university course. So is that a wasted year? Or is it a bonus year? There are a lot of words that students use. But they do get a second credit. So it is part of their 30 credits, even if they take grade 11 college science and grade 12 college science. Or sorry, grade 11 university science. Then if you look at the arts, streaming there is wide open. Students can take, let's say, grade 9 art, and that's at an open level, so it goes, essentially it goes straight across. There's no upgrading. So where the problems occur would be in math, science, and English. So let's look at the difference between an academic and applied math course in grade 9. So first of all, in the academic stream, they're much more abstract. it should be taught from starting with concrete examples and going to the abstract. I remember when I was in school, in a given chapter, let's say has 6 or 7 sections in a chapter, the first 5 sections were all the theory, and then there was one section at the end on applications. The focus now is start with some applications and develop the theory through those applications. It's much more meaningful. There's also a big difference too, and this is not just math but across the system, is that until the 1950s, let's say, the dropout rate was 60%. People had to go get a job. And then starting in the 50s and 60s, people started wanting to go to university, and so now students stay in school. So they stay in school, and so you have your weaker students who are failing, but they have to be in school. So you can't just ignore that. You have to figure out how you can improve it. And I'll touch on that again later. If we look at the applied courses, they're much more applied, but also more hands-on. We find that students at the applied course, applied level in math, are much more visual learners and much more kinesthetic. So they do well by working with manipulators. So something very simple as algebra tiles, integer tiles. For example, little tiles, the red ones could be positive numbers, the blue ones are negative numbers, but you put them together, you get one positive, one negative, you get 0. And they can see it. They can manipulate it with their hand. So it's a nice, easy way of teaching adding or subtracting integers. But if you just do it with teacher-directed chalk and talk, they learn the rules, but do they really understand it? Usually no. Let's look at a couple of examples. So these come from current textbooks. This one would be an academic, grade 9 academic lesson. And you can see we're talking about steepness. We're not using the word slope yet. We will. But we ease our way in. So we start with a visual. Years gone by. Here's the formula. Rise over run. Now let's apply it later on. But there's still some abstraction there, fewer instructions. We are asking the students to engage in a discussion with their neighbors, and there's a lot of communication, a lot of reflection, because if students can describe their understanding, then that's an extra step in terms of showing whether or not they understand. So that's an assessment piece. Assessment doesn't mean evaluation. Assessment means how well do they understand. If we now we'll go back to this one in a moment. Let's look at the applied level example. Very similar, but step 1 is use a ruler. So that becomes more kinesthetic. They're actually physically doing the measuring, so that rise and that run means something to them. So if we back up, they were given the numbers. A little bit more abstract. Okay? And again, both of them require some explanations of understanding. So one of the focuses now is to do less teacher-directed, more student-centered learning. But then, of course, the teacher still has to be involved because you bring back the class once they've done their investigations, and then we would discuss what comes out of your investigation. So it's not strictly student-centered. That's one aspect of it. So now, we're going to look at the should and then the reality afterwards. So first of all, the applied curriculum is definitely less dense, pace is slower, so it gives students time to mull over the questions, to spend some time understanding the concepts, and so as a result, they should understand it better. Not necessarily, unfortunately. More hands-on. Applied streams should be much more hands-on. As I said, they are more kinesthetic learners, more visual learners. They certainly almost never learn their math, and I think it's the same thing in all subject areas. If the teacher's up at the front just doing what we call chalk and talk. I learned that early on in my career. The other things that are beneficial, just very short lessons. Do an example, give them some practice time. Do another example, some practice time. Like in the past, it was a whole bunch of teachers talk, and then, okay, here's your homework. Get started on it in class. We still see that, and that's part of the problem. Now, let's look at a reality check. The curriculum expectations, as Kelly mentioned, we really do need to look at them again. In many respects, it is a watered-down academic course. How much do grade 9 applied students really need to know about algebra before they know how to measure things properly, for example? The curriculum tries to make it relevant to the students, but if it's too abstract, they're not going to learn it unless you have some very, very innovative teaching. Textbooks. If you take a look at textbooks, especially the older ones, as I mentioned, let's look at the theory first and then the applications afterwards. And if the students have to wait to see why they have to learn this, you've lost them in the very first day. Staffing is a serious problem. It happened in my school, it happened across the province. Who teaches grade 9 applied? Certainly not the department heads. It is the rookie teacher, or perhaps the phys ed teacher who has 5 phys ed classes and needs to fill out a timetable, so they teach math. Or it's also being used for job saving. So they'll give a teacher who's got 2 or 3 years of experience, but they might be bumped because of declining enrollment. So they'll give them 2 history, a civics, and a couple math courses that nobody else can fill. So staffing of those courses is a serious problem. Student background, we've already touched upon that. Who's taking applied level? It's the people who don't have the advantages in life. Or, quite often, it's behavior issues. Grade 8, grade 7 and 8, they had some behavior problems, and so take applied level. As opposed to looking at why are those behavior problems there? Is there a learning disability? Or are these visual learners and teachers only is not teaching a visual approach? And so on. Attendance is a serious issue. In my experience, if students show up to class, by and large, they do fine. So we've got to get them to class. And there are many, many reasons why they're absent from class. So we all know about the failure rates on the EQAO test, report cards as well, but also in community colleges. So if we look at the end product, community colleges, by and large, students who go to community college through the applied and college stream courses, extremely high dropout rate, failure rate, 60-70%. But if they go to college from a university level program, or university stream program in high school, by and large they are successful. So we can look at why this is happening, and let's look at some solutions then. There we are. Okay. Why not use your best teachers to teach grade 9 applied math? I'm using Marsh and McLuhan Catholic High School in Toronto, Catholic Board, as an example. And this happened about 5 or 6 years ago. They were ranked near the bottom on the EKO grade 9 math test. And so they made a concerted effort to put the department head and the assistant head and who they considered to be their most dynamic teachers teaching that course. And in 1 year, the results shot up. It was amazing. So get your right teachers teaching these courses. And also, I mean, it wasn't just who taught it. It was making sure they discussed how are we going to teach this? What are the best practices? So that comes from the staffing, the teaching standpoint. Make sure your resources are current, because the current textbooks are written, it doesn't matter which publisher it is, the current textbooks are written with an investigation approach, a student-centered learning in mind. There's still lots and lots of practice, but how it's taught is much more hands-on. Something in high school called credit rescue and credit recovery. Let me talk about credit recovery first. If students do not, one of the sayings is 16 by 16. 16 credits by age 16, meaning pass everything by the end of grade 10. Usually it's math that they fail. Math and English are the two highest failure rates. Credit recovery allows a student to retake the components of, let's say, their math course. Let's say there are 7 units, and they failed 3 of the units plus the final exams, so they failed the course. Well, they only have to recover those 3 units. They can do that. It's tough to do it during the regular class time, but they can do it at lunchtime, after school, and work one-on-one with a teacher. Credit rescue does that before they fail. So it gives them opportunities, let's say, to redo assignments, redo tests, and so on, before the end of the course. Get them their passing grade as soon as possible. So the old rigid master at the front is not really effective in particular with white students. I would argue it doesn't work at all in any course at any time. How do we get the students to class? You've got to engage the parents. So, and that comes both ways. If the school's not engaging with the parents, and the parents aren't trying to engage with the school, you're not going to have a lot of success for the kids who are struggling. So if it means just speaking to the teacher, or getting involved with the parents' council, and so on, it's very important to be involved. Even, and the problem is primarily socioeconomic. You find that in the schools that have low socioeconomic status, Parents' Night, I remember I was at one of those schools. We were ranked last in the appraiser report. We were tied. The bottom 15 were all tied with the lowest scores. So we had to outreach to get parents to come to Parents' Night. And once you did that, then they're going to be involved on the parent council. The other thing that we need to do to get the students to class is have some engaging lessons. Again, get the teachers, or the correct teachers teaching, but make sure the lessons are engaging. Make math fun again, instead of a chore. Things like homework clubs. So teachers are always volunteering their time to coach sports. Well, why not coach some math after school or at lunchtime? Have peer tutoring. All of that stuff works. And when we instituted that at my school, the results improved on not just QAO, but the report cards as well. The problem as well then with college at the graduation end, community colleges have this standard that they must have a certain course, but they're ignoring that. And so because of numbers, they want to keep their enrollment up. So they're accepting students with very low standards, 51% of math, even though it's a business finance course. The student has 51% in the grade 12 college math. They're not going to be very successful in most cases. So we need the community colleges then to enforce their written standards. Universities already do, but colleges don't. Okay.
Great.
Thank you very much.
Thanks so much. And we're going to go to Joanne now.
Actually, and the focus of my conversation with you this morning is going to be on choices, communication, and collaboration. So, and I'm going to focus on collaboration with teachers, your students, your children, and as parents. So, first thing I wanted to do, I just wanted to thank my parents. I'm a first-generation Canadian. I am first generation to graduate from high school in my family. Both my parents are grade 8. My mother is from Italy. My dad spoke French. But they had a high expectation for education, and they had a real passion for learning. And I thank them for transferring that passion to learning to me. So I continue to be a learner, and so as I went on in education, I really valued the learning that I got from my own students and my colleagues as well. So I'm going to just talk to you, I'm going to click the next one. So I'm going to just talk to you about how the approach that we looked at with the people that I worked with in my previous experience, in my current experience. I sort of look at making choices for the courses you're going to take in high school, whether they be applied or academic, that they're individual courses. It is a course. And that each course, just because you take one applied course doesn't mean you need to take all applied courses. So just because you take one academic course, do you take all? That the individual schedule or the pathway is personalized. So I'm going to make an analogy here about planning alongside with your child, either as a teacher or a parent, that it looks like a journey, like you're like a travel agent. So you're planning alongside, and just like a travel agent, you plan for your client. You want them to have a good trip. You want them to enjoy it. You want them to be safe, and you want to meet their needs. But in order to plan that trip, you need to know who that person is that you're working with. The other piece that I'm going to bring it back again is that the travel agent doesn't do the trip with you. So as a parent and as a teacher, you're trying to plan for that child so that they go on that journey safely, they enjoy it, and they leave with passion for a certain area. So one of the things I'm really was thrilled to hear Pedro this morning speak about it. The number one thing that we focused on in the group of people that I worked with is the first most important thing is to know your child, and that the child knows themselves. Number one priority. Now you'll notice I didn't put data or subject or mark first. I put the first thing down. I put down what is their strengths, what are they really good at, what are they passionate about, what are they interested in, because we all know as adults that you want to do something that you're connected to, that you love to do. I'm going to go back, sorry. The other thing is their learning style. So you can see I move I walk, I talk, I use my hands a lot. I like pictures. That's the kind of person I am. So I need to be involved in something that meets my style to be successful in. So it's really important that you know alongside with your child how they like to learn. I was a phys ed teacher because I need to move around. So the other thing is, and as Wayne had alluded to earlier on, it's knowing what kind of, how you learn in the courses that you take or you choose to take, whether it's applied or academic. The other thing is it's really important is socially, how do you work? Do you work independently? Do you like working with other people? Are you a problem solver? Are you a team player? We know that you need to be able to do all kinds of those things to be successful, but what is the area that you work best in? So we talked a little bit earlier on in both presentations beforehand. My experience on transitioning in schools for the last 7 years was a transition plan where we brought people together. So it was a team approach, and I'm also going to include somebody else in here that I didn't write down. So I was very fortunate in the schools that I worked with. We were grades 7 to 12, and we had guidance counselors. So guidance played a very important role in transitioning. If a student had an IEP or was identified, the special education teacher was a part of that team. The classroom teacher, the student had input, and the parent has input. But also, if a student is an English language learner, the ESL teacher played a huge role in helping that child and that family decide what course was best for them. So it was a real personalized approach for the child when you had difficulties. And this is some courses you know automatically. I know I need to do applied, no question about it. I know I need to do academic. But for the person who you're sitting on the fence with and you don't know which one I should take, this group of people collectively are really important. The other thing that we mentioned is the review of classwork, looking what they're doing in their grade 8 year. So what is it that they do? What evidence do you have to show that they're going to be successful in the next one? Report cards, EQAO scores, and what they did in 3 and 6. An IEP, an individual education plan. Know the student's strengths and interests. The last two pieces is more of a teacher piece. We really focused, we tried really hard, and by all means, we're not 100% there. We're still working at that. It was important to bring grade 8 teachers and grade 9 teachers together. Grade 8 teachers are making recommendations about courses they didn't teach. So sometimes it was really hard for me to make a recommendation or a suggestion when I really didn't know the curriculum all that well. So we we really encourage schools to come together and grade 8s meet with grade 9s, and the parent evenings that we had focused on that. And they had students there, so student voice is also important. So students talked about, what does it mean for me to be in a class, a science class that's applied? What does it mean for me to be in an academic? But the student voice, a parent voice, sample classroom work, conversation, and collaboration was really, really important. Oh, you go on. Okay, so there's a new piece that's coming out. Some of you may have seen this already. This is being implemented this year, and it's called Creating Pathways for Success. And again, there are 4 questions that help the education career life planning. So, who am I? What are my opportunities? So again, who am I? What I need to know myself, and that's going right into K to 6. What are my opportunities? Who? Not what do I want to become, but who do I want to become? So I want to know about transferable skills, because there are careers that are out there that we don't know about. When I was in high school, I couldn't imagine a cell phone. I couldn't imagine. I mean, I think back at Star Trek, like beam me up, Scotty, and thinking, oh my gosh, you know what? And here we are. I had to remember my first phone was a flip phone, and I never thought of that when I was in high school. So we're looking at developing skills, so that brings them into the future as into areas that we don't even know, and then and goal setting. So there are 2 resources here that the school boards have invested in. Some boards have invested in My Blueprint, some have Career Cruising, and all students are asked to do an individual pathway plan. It's fluid, it's going to change. It's like your itinerary. It's like your travel plan. It moves, you can look along, you know, you can do it alongside with your son or daughter, and it's really fun to do as a parent. I've done it myself. I've got two sons. And it's it really is really neat to learn alongside with it, because education is not the same as it was when we were in high school. So the other thing that's really important, and I think is, especially for a student who's very, very anxious or very uncertain about transferring to or seeing what it is, it's okay to shadow a class. So we highly encourage the student as a transition plan and sits in a class or buddies with somebody to see what it's like when they make the decision. And this specialized pathways, that could be a whole workshop on its own, so I'll just move on. Okay. So, what are the things that are influencing our children and their choices and our parents? Well, media. I have to tell you, a long time ago when CSI first started, we offered a course called Police Studies. We had a waiting list of kids. Think about the Food Network. Hospitality courses have gone through the roof because people love to cook, and it's acceptable, and it's respected work. Renovations, flipping houses, all of those things have really had an impact on pathways and directions and careers that people want to go in. Look at social media. Look at social justice areas. These are all really up and growing areas. Peers. Peers are important too. You know what? It's the center of their universe when they're adolescents. They're very, very powerful influencers. Parents and adults. So caring adults, or it could be a teacher, it could be a coach. Those kinds, and they want to hear, they want to have your acceptance, they want to hear your input. The classroom teacher and the classroom subject is also, can be very influential. If the teacher is very passionate about an area, that transfers to the student. So the way a student, or, okay, almost done, they're really, really important. Experiential learning is another thing that also helps with the helping your son or daughter figure out what they're going to do down the road on their itinerary or life plan. We've really focused on trying to bring the classroom into the world and the world into the classroom. So being able to go out and being able to bring people in. That's a real good, neat direction that things are going. And so what is your role? You are the travel agent. You plan alongside with your son or daughter. But you don't go on, you don't actually do the trip with them. This is the other role as a parent is that it's a balancing act sometimes. It's the push-pull. It's our own adult peer influences. What my sister did with her kids, what my neighbor's doing with their kids. All of those things can influence our decision and the conversations that go on. The biggest quote for me that has been very impactful for myself is that being fair is not giving everyone the same thing. All my kids are going to go in one direction and that's it. Well, that wasn't the case with my own children. It was personalized, it was individualized, because they are different and they have different likes and ideas. But it's giving them what they need. And There's a line that I've heard over and over again. I've done a few parent sessions, and it's keeping all your doors open. The keeping all your doors open can create a high level of anxiety today, because the doors that we had were maybe one or two. The doors that your children have are a multitude of doors. And so if they don't know where they're going, every road might get them nowhere. So if they surface everything, I'm in French immersion, I'm in math, some can do it. I'm in every single subject area. But to get into that course, you need a certain average to get into a certain program. But you've tried to cover all the bases, and you can't get into the one you want because you don't have that much. So we say start early. Find the door, the path that's you're passionate, you're strong about, where your strengths are. And finally, our strength, creativity, and growth as a society depends on our capacity to develop talents and potentialities of our people. So we've got to work on our students' potential, and our children's potential. Not ours, but our students.
Great.
That's it. Thank you.
I'll stand as well. I realize we're getting very close to lunch. It's the joy of being the last person on the panel. So I promise I will keep my comments brief so that you still have time to enjoy or go into the next session, is it? So I guess I'm going to start with the big gasp announcement, and that is in our district, in one of our schools, we have opted to offer only academic math for our students coming into grade 9. And so I'm hoping that's the hook that will keep you here a few minutes late. And so what I'm going to do first is explain the context of why we decided to do this as a district, what philosophy we were really believing in. But I want to say that as a district, we were actually doing better than the province in the EQAO assessment of applied mathematics. So we saw that our students were more successful. And I also want to say that we recognized that we valued all course types. We understand that as teachers, other than technology, we come with the bias of having a university degree. And so this decision was not at all about us having a bias that university is where all of our students should end up. We don't believe that as a district. We value all of the outcomes that students will pursue after secondary school. Our concern was how students and why students were choosing applied mathematics, and wanted to support students to plan their high school career by design rather than by default. And we were concerned that a lot of students were ending up in applied by default. So we did a lot of research around Harold Weck's work at Stanford University. And in a nutshell, it is the concept that there are different approaches to learning. And so if someone has a fixed mindset, they tend to believe someone's either intelligent or born with particular talents. And so those people who have fixed mindsets tend to not be risk takers because they see failure as a personal reflection of them. Whereas people with a growth mindset believe that with perseverance, with practice, with proper instruction, intelligence and talent grow. And so certainly in our district, that is a philosophy that we are embracing in all subject areas, but most particularly in mathematics, because we felt we kept bumping up against a culture that said it was okay to not be good at math. And so we challenged teachers who weren't mathematics teachers to stop talking like that. So when the students are coming in and saying, oh, I've got a killer calculus, and the English teacher says, calculus test the next day, and the English teacher says, oh, I don't know how you do that, I was never good at math. We challenge teachers that we're role models, and so we really need to focus on, with persistence and practice, students could be successful and achieve at a high level in all of their course types. The interesting thing about this as well, I think, is that once we started to think about this and think about the strengths that our students bring to them, Wayne talked about, the use of manipulatives and how that can help students understand. Our feeling was that it should be used in all course types, not just applied, because there are students who perhaps want to study at the academic course type, but are still hands-on learners. And why shouldn't they be able to access academic programming and have the manipulatives out on the table? If they understand it conceptually, that's what we're looking for. so once we started to embrace this growth mindset, we started to then question a lot of the assumptions we have in secondary schools. Because as teachers, we really care about our students, and so we often guide them because we want to take care of them. And we're afraid sometimes of students getting in over their heads. And so sometimes when we're guiding students, we're suggesting perhaps that unconsciously that they're lowering their standards. Instead, what we should do is listen to the student, listen to the family, hear what that student's dreams, goals are, and then figure out as a system how we can support that learner. Once we started to question this, we took off, it's very common for grade 8 teachers to make a recommendation as far as what the student should be studying in course type for grade 9. We decided we were going to take that off and just listen to families and students and then do our best to support. The first year we took it off, we had 3% more of our students study at the academic course type. And in particular, the English one was fascinating for us because more of them chose English and their humanities type courses, but still remained in applied mathematics. But our attainment of provincial standards, so for students achieving 70% or more, actually rose as we had more students studying at the academic course type. We also challenged our schools. There's an option, every student has to graduate, has to pass the literacy test to graduate, and so in grade 10. And so we challenged our schools around deferral rates. There were a lot of students being deferred, and we did this for other reasons to free up their pathway and their course selections in grade 12, where we thought it was really important for them to have the literacy test behind them. So we did it for other reasons. But what we found the year that we said we don't want any more deferrals unless it's for medical reasons, for example, anxiety, or the student has just arrived to Canada and the English skill, it's obvious, there's no way. Once we did that, every single one of our principals we met with, and they told us stories about students in their school that they would have deferred because they wouldn't have predicted the student would pass, and the student did pass. So we started to think a lot about how we play a role in trying to predict individual success of students based on past behaviors and past academic history, and that maybe we need to stop doing that and be more open. So these discoveries certainly motivated us to look at applied math, where we were still seeing more of our students choosing applied math, a little bit different than the People for Education research in our particular district. Alan King's research really motivated us, and Kelly referenced that in her comments about 5 years ago, because we believed as educators when we told students you should go into applied, it's hands-on, it's going to meet your needs, because we were concerned that their previous achievement wasn't strong enough to be successful in academic. We believed they would access college programs, and we believed they would access apprenticeships. Now, when Alan King's research came out and challenged that belief and showed us that those students taking grade 9 applied math actually weren't doing the things we thought they were going to be doing, we started to wonder then, how are we serving those students? Because we were concerned that their previous achievement wasn't strong enough to be successful in academic. We believed they would access college programs, and we believed they would access apprenticeships. And when Alan King's research came out and challenged that belief and showed us that those students taking grade 9 applied math actually weren't doing the things we thought they were going to be doing, we started to wonder then, how are we serving those students to ensure that they can make choices later on? And so what we were led to believe is it's about expectations and having high expectations. And so those discoveries really led us to decide to offer in one of our schools that is a rural school where many of the families don't think about post-secondary education. We chose that school to have only academic math in grade 9. So it's a full year for the students. For those students, we perform a diagnostic at the beginning. And for those students who don't have gaps in their math learning, on the alternate days, they access a different credit. For those students who do have significant gaps in their math learning, they then get a learning strategies credit on the alternate days, but they're working with their same math teacher. They're working on closing the specific gaps that the diagnostics have shown us that they have. And we're explicitly teaching them about growth mindset, the importance of persistence, the importance of resiliency, and a real focus on having students practice formatively and not having to worry about it counting towards the final grade. We then want to, in January, we'll then ask all of the families and students, and if the student says, you know what, this really isn't for me, I really want to go to applied, then starting in February, we'll transform one of those sections, and the student can choose, and we're being, because the applied curriculum is different than the academic, they'll get the full applied experience February to June. So the integrity of the curriculum is not suffering, but at least they'll be making that choice based on the experience of having gone and tried the academic and having their math teacher for twice the length of time than they would normally. We did do it in the school in English the previous year. All of the students stayed together for the whole year, so we are trying it now with the mathematics. Certainly our goals for the project are that all of our students will develop a growth mindset. We do believe that for lifelong success, they're going to need to be open to learning, and to be open to learning, they have to recognize that they're not always going to have the answers, that there's going to be struggles, but that they can persevere and find the ladder to climb that wall when they encounter it. And real emphasis on diagnostics, which in our example we're using prime. It's time consuming, and so the bump in the road for us with using diagnostics often in math classrooms is teachers get concerned about covering the curriculum, and they feel the diagnostics take too much time. And yet, what is the point in covering curriculum when we need to know where our learners' weaknesses are and then focus on those areas to increase their learning? So the real opportunity for diagnostics to play a greater role in math learning. And then finally, we want every single one of our students to leave our system feeling confident as mathematics learners. It's not to suggest that they're going to necessarily want to dedicate their lives to it, but maybe they won't feel anxious when they're faced with a math problem. So those are the goals of our project. I guess one of the things that Carol Dweck says that really sticks in my mind is that lowering standards doesn't raise students' self-esteem, but neither does raising standards without giving students a way of reaching them. And so our goal really is to raise the standards so that every student has high expectations of themselves, but then give them the tools that they need to be successful within that culture of high expectations. So I know that was really fast and I kept you late, but thank you.